Welcome to the Customer Smarts podcast, where you'll discover smarter ways to deliver customer experiences. I'm your host, Justin Stafford. Building a customer-centric culture is smart but hard to do. It's smart because it's more efficient for the business and better for customers, so it's a win-win. The problem is, many large organisations are still structured around key product areas and working in silos. So trying to transition to a customer-centric culture and operating model is often an enormous task. My guest in this episode, Dr. Chris Brown, is a global expert on building and maintaining customer-centric cultures. He's worked with many large corporates in the US and Australia to help them embed, benchmark, and monitor cultural change. So in this episode, we're going to dive into why having a customer-centric culture is so important, what's holding organizations back from being customer-centric, and his process to embed and maintain a customer-centric culture. Welcome, Chris. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Justin. It's great to be here, mate.
You've spent an enormous amount of time working with leading organizations around the world to help them embed customer-centric cultures. So I'd like to start by getting your take on customer-centric culture. How do you typically explain what it is?
Yeah, so I typically start by explaining what culture is, right, in organisations. And I think that one of the best definitions is really how we do things around here. It's just the way we do things. And so a customer culture is, we put customers first. It's just the way that we do things. We don't really know another way. It's just how we operate. And so that's kind of been the easiest way to explain it for people. It's almost a feeling. And, if you think about your own experiences going into, say, a bookstore, for instance, you walk into a bookstore, you go in there and the people are friendly. They sort of know what you like to read. They make good recommendations for you. There's sort of a feeling that you get in that place that, this is a bookstore that actually has thought about my needs, cares about me, and, is creating this great experience for me. It's a kind of visceral feeling that you get. So it's something that is difficult to pin down, but we've all experienced it when we feel a customer culture. We're in a place where people are happy, they're engaged, there's value there, I'm getting a great experience. So that's what it kind of feels like to be in that environment.
Yeah. And why is becoming customer-centric important? What sort of business impacts do you see it have?
Yeah, so it's fundamentally about, if we think about organisations, there's sort of two purposes for organisations. One is to make money, right, to be profitable, to be organisations that generate cash. And the other is to make a difference. And you've got organisations on both sides of that, some that are just designed to make money, some that are just designed to make a difference. But I think the best businesses that are really sustainable kind of combine those two things, right? So they have this connection, they're connectors, right? And customer-centric culture is the connector because it combines the customer and what we're doing to improve their life, how we actually making life better for them, and then how are we doing that in a way that's profitable to the organisation, sustainable, and something that we can scale over time. So, there's a lot of benefits to having that culture. There's a lot more resilience in these organisations. They're able to adapt more effectively. They're really in tune with this external environment. They don't get bogged down in sort of the way in which we've always done things. So they're sort of able to adapt and break through status quo. So there's a lot when it comes to the customer. There's great value for customers. There's great value for employees. And these are organisations that are very sustainable and resilient to disruption and a whole lot of other things that we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, it helps give our organisation purpose, doesn't it? Because I think when employees become disconnected from the customer and the core purpose, they're just performing and ticking boxes and trying to address numbers, and they lose sense of what they're actually doing, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, they can and get disconnected from why they're there and what the bigger purpose is. And then what happens is, people get focused really on their own role and then what they're doing and what they're getting out of the organization rather than the bigger picture. And there are a myriad of challenges when you really scale, because you're talking about human complexity, right, at scale, when we've got lots and lots of people with lots and lots of different tasks and roles, different incentive structures for them, different goals, different ways of doing things, different personalities. You've got the whole gamut of complexity that comes when you scale. And, so one of the key ones is the silo mentality, and that, the fact that, well, I'm in sales, so I'm just focused on getting the sale, and then the organisation can do what they want with that, but I'm done. Or I'm just in marketing. Well, I'm just going to, run communications out there and, make sure that we're, running good events and attracting customers. Or I'm just in customer service. I'm just, responsible for those pieces. And I think the best organisations overcome that by really integrating these functions more effectively. And a lot of that integration is not necessarily, in terms of how they're organised, but also just creating environments where people are encouraged to have relationships cross-functionally, so that there are personal relationships. Because at the end of the day, the further you are away from the customer, the more sort of psychological distance there is, and you're not feeling the pain of the customer anymore, are you? And when you're not feeling the pain directly, it's easy to kind of just go about your business, right? So I think, that silo mentality is a big one that creates challenges. I think the other thing is that it's a challenge for companies is when they get a bit too rigid with processes.
Yeah.
And, there was a great story. One of the CEOs of a telecommunications firm that we work with, great CEO, really customer-centric CEO, and he would spend a lot of time talking to customers, whether it was in store, in retail stores, or with enterprise customers, the whole gamut of different types of customers. And one of the things that he instituted was his whole executive team would, they'd double jack, right? So they're both plugged into the phone calls in the morning, Monday morning, listening to customers come in. So there'll be a bit of listening around that stuff. And the other thing that they would do would be to actually call customers that gave them a rating on the NPS system.
Yep.
So you'd get your 10 out of 10, NPS score, you get your 1 out of 10. They'd allocate a couple of those each, and every executive had to make a phone call to the 10s and the 1s. So, of course, most of them didn't really want to talk to the 1s, so they'd start with the 10s, right? So I'll give the 10s a call to start off with a good note. And so this CEO called someone that gave them a 10. And this guy had been in one of the retail stores, had a great experience. And the NPS question was something like, what was it like dealing with Leanne in the retail store? And 10 out of 10. She was fantastic. She was attentive, helpful, friendly. She fixed, the problems that I had. But there was one thing that I'd already spoken to you guys about, and I'd been told that you couldn't do anything about it. And he said, "Oh, what was that?" He said, "Well, my wife passed away about 3 weeks ago, and she's under contract with her phone. And I thought, there's no need for it, right? Why should she have a contract for the phone anymore? Surely I could cancel it." And I was told, no, it's a 12-month contract, can't cancel it. And this just sort of enraged the CEO. He kind of thought, my God, what sort of company am I running here, right? Went back to the executive team and he said, look, this is what's happened in this call. They gave us 10 out of 10. And look, under the covers, what's actually going on. And one of the guys said, well, she's under contract. And he said, if it was your wife, what would you do? He said, oh, well, I'd want the contract cancelled, of course. Well, why aren't we doing it? Right? Why aren't we doing it? And, I think that speaks to the fact that, it's humans dealing with humans, and even at scale, the really good companies will take the time at the senior level to engage like that with customers, and the ability to do that. And sure, you can't engage with millions of customers, but you can engage with customers on a regular basis. And you'll get some of those stories that are very powerful stories about the type of company we'll want to be, because we don't want to be the company that locks in people's wives that have passed away into contracts, right? Do we want to be that sort of company? No, we don't want to be that sort of company. And so that's, I think, a way of breaking through some of that, is where you've got leaders that are willing to do that. And that's how you can certainly start creating change that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And what organizations have you seen that have the most customer centric cultures, and what sort of advantages does it give them?
Yeah. So I think there's quite a few sort of obvious ones. I often ask this when I do leadership workshops, is I ask, who are the customer centric companies that come to mind? And most people will say companies like Amazon, Apple, they'll come up. Maybe IKEA, sometimes. So a lot of the, typical consumer brands, because we've all experienced those and we've seen those and we've kind of had good experiences and we can relate to some of those. I think the others that on the B2B side, companies like Salesforce and HubSpot have had, very strong focuses on customers, and been good at doing that in that space as well. I think that what's really amazing about these organizations is that they're not just talking about customer centricity or customer session. It's embedded in their practices. It's part of what they do. It's not just the poster on the wall. It is their practices. It's sort of their culture revealed. And if you go and you work with these companies, or if you go and sort of spend time with them, a lot of those practices you'll come across. So I've spent quite a bit of time with Amazon over the years, and I've been in meetings with senior executives where they leave the chair in the room for the customer. It's one of their great practices that they do. I've been in meetings with Starbucks, and I've had meetings with senior executives there where they've got two seats. One for their customer, and one for their associates, right? Which is sort of their people.
Yep.
And so they're small, meaningful practices, though, that just remind everyone what we're about. And I think that's what gets lost in a lot of organizations, is we've just kind of forgotten what we're here for and the impact that the decisions make, on customers.
Yep.
Another one that really comes to mind that's a great one for me. Have you been to Costco before?
Oh, only a couple of times, but yeah, it's a
Okay.
big discount warehouse type of
Yes.
place, right? Yeah. There's
It
not that
is.
many there, and they're always like way on the outskirts of town.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, particularly here in Australia, they are. So, in the US, I was a huge fan of Costco because it's a sort of a massive warehouse, really high quality products, but sort of stacked up in bulk. So, you're buying sort of probably 6 months worth of mixed nuts at a time, when you go in there. But it's a really interesting experience to go into those stores. They've really got it dialed in, and something that they're really famous for is that you can pretty much return anything.
Yeah.
And I was in one of the stores, and I was actually lining up. I had to return something myself. I was lining up behind someone who brought in a dead plant. I thought, geez, she's got some real gutso to really line up and say, I want a refund.
Yeah.
She's had this thing for 3 years, apparently, right? And she's brought the dead plant back, and they've given her money back.
Yeah, right.
And so I thought that's really interesting, right? I mean, how they do that, and they do this, and certainly they're going to be customers that sort of take advantage of that to a certain extent. But what they really see it as an investment in trust.
Yeah.
And it's really a marketing investment ultimately for them, right? Because people rave about that. They talk about that. They've got stories, all sorts of stories about those sorts of things. And the reality is it happens, very, very frequently, right? Things like that. I mean, it was kind of a rare event that I was there. I mean, everyone else had sort of fairly legitimate return requests, right? But, I just experienced that firsthand. But so, they're a great example of super customer centric. They've really got their model dialed in. It's really high quality product in bulk at low prices, very transparent. You've got a membership for it, all of this sort of stuff. And, that for me, that's something that really brings it to life. And you look at their track record. I mean, what are the benefits of it? I mean, we can see it, can't we, in these organizations, right? If you look at the performance of these businesses over time, it's just out of this world, right? In terms of growth, profit, revenue, everything.
One of the things that's interesting is, I've seen and worked with some companies who have a customer centric strategy. They're trying to get there, and they might almost have that customer centric feel through the front line, but then in the back offices, sometimes they struggle. Have you seen some of that, or seen companies with that, and then sort of actually then take the final steps to operationalize it?
Yeah, look, I think it's always going to be a bit of a balancing act, because every sort of decision around how you organize a company is a trade-off. So, I've seen companies that have shifted from measuring product revenue and a P&L around product to a P&L around a segment of customers. So I've seen those sorts of shifts. And again, there's some trade-offs there, but I think that there's certainly an advantage in making that shift, because you're then looking at the market in a different way to the way you do with the product, which becomes kind of quite siloed and myopic around what this product is. So the combination of the two I've seen be quite a successful combination. It becomes quite a complex matrix structure, but then a lot of these businesses are that way, and there's going to be those trade-offs. You're not going to have a perfect sort of organizational structure. If you look at the way Amazon do it, what they've done, I think, very successfully in terms of how to organize is in small teams. So they're very big on, I think they've got their 2 pizza rule. They don't like having teams that can't be fed by more than 2 pizzas, right? Yeah. So, 8 people, 10 people, and very focused. And they've got someone that's sort of a single-threaded leader, they call them, that's really responsible for that particular activity. And it's going to be based on some core need that they're trying to solve for. So you think about some of the experiments they've been doing in the US around, retail environments where you can actually walk into a shopping. It's essentially, I'd probably describe it a bit like a 7-Eleven, right? It's a sort of small grocery store, but you walk in, grab whatever you want, and walk out. And they've got all these technologies set up to scan who you are and just to bill your Amazon account, right? Yeah. And so, that takes real focus of, obviously a team, but they're trying to solve this sort of need around, how do I make a really hyper efficient retail environment? And they're not quite there yet. Hasn't really sort of scaled up yet, but they're sort of progressing in that way over time. And I think the advantage that Bezos and Amazon have is, from the very beginning, they've had this culture, and so it's much easier to start it from the beginning than to try and reform it. Kind of reshape the plane as you're flying it is a difficult challenge. But companies do it, and they do need to push to it, because if they don't, then they get to a point where they become irrelevant, right? So it's something that the companies that aren't able to do it really go out of business. Is the ultimate sort of straw, right?
Yeah.
So
well, I think the KPIs you were talking about is very important, like that shift from product centric KPIs to customer centric, and having shared KPIs across team. Then you start that, because people perform how they're marked. So if they're marked by selling more product, they'll go out and try and sell more product. But if they're marked by getting more customers, then they'll get more customers, regardless of what product it is. So I've seen organizations that shift's really helped change the behavior, and you can say you're customer centric, but if you're still getting marked by product sales, then it actually doesn't really change. But if you do change the KPIs and go to that length, from what I've seen, it definitely helps kind of kick it into gear a lot more.
Yeah, there's no question. There's a great paper when I was doing my doctoral studies that was called "The Folly of Wanting A but paying for B or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It's that idea that you've just described, right? It's like, we want you to be this way, but we're paying you to be that way. So what are you going to do? You're going to do what you're getting paid for, right?
Yeah.
And it's just human nature. We're all designed to do that. So you do have to be really thoughtful about how, because it's culture, but it's also incentives. And, that's important that structure's right. And I think a lot of the best way that we see is shared incentive schemes, right? Which are across, getting to goals. I mean, Amazon's pretty, unique in terms of having their sort of real long-term sort of share ownership program in place. But a lot of these companies tend to have those sorts of things in place to ensure that, what one model of thinking about it is, most employees can come in thinking about what's in it for me as an employee only. What you want them to be able to do is think about what's in it for me as an employee. That needs to be ticked. But what's in it for the organisation in terms of how am I operating and how am I contributing to the organisation, and then ultimately how am I contributing to the customer, right? So is it good for the customer? Is it good for the organisation? And then ultimately, is it good for me? I mean, that's the order that you'd like people to be thinking in, and that comes down to leadership, to be able to help people think beyond just what I'm responsible for and what I'm doing and how I'm getting paid, but to think more about the organisation and then the customer.
So I'd like to talk about the process that you go through with organisations to help them become customer centric. You've got I guess, a proprietary tool that you sort of go through with customers. Can you just talk us through that?
Yeah. So look, I probably the best place to start thinking about this is, this idea of customer centricity is quite a vague one, and it's one that everyone's got a bit of a different opinion on. What is customer centricity? Some people think it's sort of doing everything the customer wants, right? Being sort of compelled by the customer. And so it seems like it might not be profitable or whatever. And others think it's, something else. So, there's a wide range of different views on what it is. And the first thing is to kind of get some cohesion around what is a customer centric culture and what is it in your organization specifically, right? So, every company is going to look at the market differently, look at their customers differently, segment them differently, view them differently. But you want to make sure that there's some coherence around how they're looking at customers, like what are the customers that they're serving and what are the different groups, what do they look like? And then underneath that, what are their needs, right? So that's sort of the starting point that you really want to have. And for us, the way that we really approach it is we want to align everyone in the organisation around that. So we want to get a sort of common understanding of really a baseline of how customer centric are they today. So we start typically with a diagnostic tool we call the MRI. It's a market responsiveness index. It's a way of thinking about how agile is this business when it comes to adapting to the market environment that we're in. So that's kind of the first piece. And a diagnostic like that is super important. And the reason it's important is because a lot of companies are sort of doing things to try and make themselves more customer centric, but they might be doing the wrong things, and often they could be. I mean, a good example, actually, I think I mentioned earlier, I'm a cyclist, and I had a problem with my bike the other day, and I've been riding for 30 years, right? But I've got this noise in the cranks. Well, I think it's the cranks. And I've been pedaling it around and so on. I couldn't figure out what the hell it was. So I've taken it into the bike shop, and I was ready to replace the crank and just buy a new crank or whatever. And he did a thorough examination of it, and it turned out to be the rear hub of the bike, like a completely different part of the bike, right? And so I would have replaced the cranks at whatever that's going to cost me, $500, instead of the rear hub, and would have had the same problem. And I think that's the issue with when you don't diagnose effectively, you can solve the wrong problem.
Yeah.
And so, having a tool that gives you the input, gives you the feedback on how customer centric are we today. And we've got a model that's underpinned by a bunch of research. And we get that data back, and that includes a lot of insight from employees, because ultimately people in the company know how customer centric it is. right? When you work in an organization, you don't have to work there for long to get a sense of, are we really customer centric, or maybe we're not so customer centric? I've seen a bit of behavior over here that's kind of maybe working against what we're meant to be doing here when it comes to customer centricity. So that's where you'll get a lot of data back. And then it's a matter of saying, well, what is it out of that data that we should prioritize, and how do we sort of move forward with this? So we have a roadmap of stages, but it really does begin with this diagnostic tool to understand where they are. And then it's a lot of it's really related to education and helping people understand that, regardless of your role, whether you're in finance, whether you're in legal, HR, you've got a role to play when it comes to being customer centric. And we've found in really large organizations, we'll find some really customer centric people in the back end of the organization. They're sort of probably they're predisposed to be that way, and they really engage with the material, and they're the change makers, right? They're the people that then grab this and help to fuel the fire of customer centric change, because it is a combination of things that need to be changed. Maybe there's some ways in which we incentivize people, some ways in which we measure people that need to change. Maybe there's some processes that need to be changed. But there's also just the mindset change, which is really starting to really embed customer thinking in the different roles. So just reminding ourselves, there's a customer at the end of this process, there's a customer at the end of what we're doing here. How's it going to impact them? And really being thoughtful about that throughout the organization. So that's an educational piece. That's a skill development piece. And so a lot of the leadership engagements around that, because we'll have leaders that have got backgrounds in finance and IT and maybe never exposed to really customer experience, or, maybe never even met a customer, right? Some of them had a whole career and not really interfaced with customers before. Yeah. So we did a huge job in Germany with a group that I think, there was 120 just super, super technical engineers in the back end of this telco that ran all the sort of infrastructure for the telco. And I don't think any of them had ever seen a customer or spoken to a customer or anything before, right? Yeah. So part of the process is often customer immersion. So we bring some customers in to say, what's it like dealing with your company? Oh, well, we've had a few challenges. And here are some of the challenges we've had. Yeah. And people go, oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, making it real is very important, and visual as well. Because otherwise you just end up, you're in spreadsheets or what have you, and these people in the back end so disconnected from the customer.
Yeah, it's easy for that to happen because I think it's this is what happens in organisations, and so it's about bringing that back to the fore. And so customer immersion programs is a big part of that, and we're really helping to guide the company over time to shift the organisation. So, there's some quick wins that you can do. There might be some small practices like putting customers at the top of people's agenda. So from a leadership point of view, what you'll find with most quarterly reviews is it starts with the numbers, right? Here's how we're killing it. We've killed it in this product line, that one. Growth's good, profit's good, numbers are looking good. In customer-centric companies, we start with the customer. Here are the customers that we've impacted this quarter. These are the new customers that come on. This is what we're doing. Here's some projects. Here's a story about these customers. That's the ideal, right? Start with that, and then we'll get to the numbers, because the numbers we're always going to get to them. They're important. We need to know them. But we start with the customer story, how we're impacting customers first, and then we work into the numbers, what's happening with the numbers, etc. So a small change like that creates significant change, right? If you start to see your senior leadership doing that, that can trickle down into the middle management and so on.
And you have a benchmarking tool as well to help organizations, I guess, understand how customer centric they are. Can you talk through that and I guess some of the experiences you've seen with some of the organizations who use it?
Yeah. So this is embedded in our diagnostic I mentioned earlier. So the diagnostic also benchmarks. So you'll get essentially there's 40 items on this survey that goes out to all employees. And from that, we get a bunch of data that will show us how an organization stacks up on 8 disciplines we have in the model. And, from sort of at the bottom of the database to the top of the database, you can imagine companies at the top of the database are companies like Amazon and Apple and companies that are really customer centric. But that gives you a bit of a placeholder. It gives you a number around your customer centric culture. So it's on a 100-point scale. So you might be at the 60th percentile, for instance, which means that you're better than 60% of the companies in the database, but you've got 40% of the companies that are better than you. So you've got some room to grow. And so that sort of gives you a placeholder. The other piece then is this open-ended feedback that we get from employees. And we ask questions like, what can the leadership do to ensure that we're more customer-centric than we are today? And so you can imagine the richness of the data that you get back from that question. And so we would then do some analytics around that data to help them sort of prioritize. Look, these are the key themes that came back. Here are the key things that people were saying about the organization's leadership and what the leadership could do to enhance customer culture. So that's really the key catalyst tool to give us a framework to work with, and then to shift that over time. And then we can take that in 12 months' time and say, are we moving the needle on this? And a small difference can make a huge change, right? 1 or 2% difference across a large organization can really be multiple millions of dollars in terms of outputs at the end of the day, because we're just now operating in a more customer-centric way as an organization. And we've done a lot of modeling on how people respond to this MRI survey and business performance outcomes. So to give you an example, in this large telco with 28 different businesses around the world, we're able to marry up what's their MRI score and what's their NPS score, and then ultimately their profitability in that particular business. And we found that those with a really strong, what we call a customer-centric culture, the MRI score, had higher NPS and had higher profitability. So we could see those relationships across those different, and these are 28 different businesses around the world, all selling the same product, right? It's all telco, but just different environments, different markets, some different dynamics. But the relationships between the culture of those different subgroups and their business performance outcome was really, really clear. So you could then say, okay, this one's doing really, really well. What are they doing there? Oh, geez, they've got a leader that's actually really customer-centric. She's always talking about customers. She was really driving that message. She's out seeing customers all the time, da-da-da-da. Okay, how do we take some of those practices to some of these other groups and embed that sort of behavior?
Well, unfortunately, it's time to wrap up. It's been so great to chat, Chris. You've given us a ton of great insights and great stories, and really helped us understand the world of customer-centric culture. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Justin. It's been a great pleasure and great to chat with you.
Thanks for tuning in. Some amazing insights from a great CX leader. If you found this insightful, make sure you hit the subscribe or follow button now, as we have some great episodes coming up. And if you have any questions or like to chat, reach out to us at customersmarts.co. Catch you next time.